Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy. This episode I'm going to be reviewing the Sunday night football matchup between the Packers and the Falcons, a rematch of the NFC title game at the Falcons' brand new stadium, the Mercedes-Benz Dome. Falcons managed to come away with the victory in this one in what was frankly a costly game for the Packers. Man, did they get beat up in this one. They went into the game with a lot of injuries and came out with an even larger amount to significant players. My first thoughts on this are that the Falcons have to feel good after a fairly lackluster performance in week one to come into this game and just take apart one of the fiercest rivals that they will likely have in the NFC. But when you take into consideration those injuries, it's perhaps a little less so. As always, I'm going to analyse this game, give my thoughts on what both teams looked to do, how they did. Not really going to focus on statistics at all. That's not what this show is about. And look at where they both go from here. So we'll start with the Falcons offense. This was much more like what we saw last season. Still doesn't feel like the passing game is quite operating on all cylinders, but I think part of that is just they're being a little bit less aggressive while they kind of feel out where they're at this point in the season. The run game managed to get on track this week as well. That helped, no doubt. Julio Jones looked uncoverable. He played a good game. I'm surprised he wasn't targeted a bit more to really just try and get that fear factor back. I mean, he's always going to possess it just because of the nature of the athlete that he is. But he had a big day. Looked much quicker last week. I don't know what it was. May have just been a bit of rust. But this week he looked back to his best. Looked incredibly dangerous after the catch. It was commented on by Chris Collinsworth on the broadcast. They looked really fast in this game. Playing in that dome certainly helps, but yeah, this offense was playing quick. The run game looked very good. Both Coleman and Freeman managing to have success. Freeman had a really solid performance. They got bottled up last week. This was much better. A lot of that helped, of course, by the injuries that the Packers sustained. Losing Mike Daniels in this game early was a huge blow. That was always going to be difficult. This is an enormously talented, well, not even close to an enormously talented Packers defence. Mike Daniels is their best player on that side of the ball, so losing him certainly helped open up some of those run lanes. Don't think the pass protection was great, all things considered. Ryan got hurried a lot more. They're not playing on at the same level they did last season, based on the start of these two games in the pass protection. On the pass protection side of things, I think that's got to be a bit of a concern, and I certainly think it's a contributing factor to this team not looking to go deep as often as they did last year. The tackles in particular, the right tackle spot looking vulnerable to rushers at the moment. Clay Matthews managed to get a sack in this game. It's not something we've been able to say often in the last couple of seasons. Nick Perry's playing surprisingly well. He's looking like a legitimate player, but with how effective the Falcons were able to run the ball, particularly up the gut with Freeman, it kind of negated that rush a little bit. The Falcons were able to have a balanced attack, much like we saw for the majority of last season when they were highly successful. Once again, Coleman showed that he is more than capable as a number two. And just in the receiving game, he's an absolute menace. It's just too fast for the inside linebackers that the Packers possess. And he was able to make some significant plays. Mohamed Sanu and Taylor Gabriel, they are what they are. They're just solid cogs in this offense. Sanu will win a lot of one-on-one matchups and make some good catches. He's not the most explosive player, and he played his part in this game, come up with some key first downs. He just does enough to make the opposing team have to respect him. Taylor Gabriel's just a threat. You have to have a safety somewhere in his vicinity because he's got the ability to take the top off. He was quiet in this game. I think when this team gets that run game a bit more established over the course of the season, we'll see him loading up to take the top off defences a bit more. I think much like I discussed with the Buccaneers yesterday, this game was well in hand. Once Desmond Trufant got the turnover and the touchdown at the beginning of the third quarter, this game was for all intents and purposes over, especially with the injuries the Packers had sustained. I feel like the Falcons took their foot off the gas. Unlike the Super Bowl, it did not bite them in this case, but I think at this point in the season, much like the Buccaneers yesterday, I think the smart thing to do is to, when you've got a lead that significant, it's incredibly difficult to lose a game. This point in the season, I think you do want to go a bit conservative to just keep teams away from what you're doing. Maybe try and mislead them a little bit, go very vanilla. It just makes you that bit harder to prepare for. It means you've got some stuff in the bag of tricks for later on in the season. And I think that's where the Falcons went with this. Matt Ryan ended up not having a huge day, but it looked like he could have. He was picking apart this secondary at will. Looked a lot more comfortable in spite of a reasonable pass rush from the Packers. Was spreading the ball around well to a variety of weapons. As long as Julio's healthy, this team, I think offensively, is just going to be hard to stop. There's too many guys. You take out Julio, I think they lose a little bit of that luster. But whilst he's there, they're fantastic. I like the variety in the play calling they had this week. We saw runs to the inside, the outside. Saw Julio being used after the catch. They used him for some intermediate stuff. Just when he's one-on-one, he's impossible to defend. Feel like they could really do with a blocking tight end of some significance. Austin Hooper is not a particular asset in that regard, and I just feel like that is something that could really boost this team. It is something they're looking to do, and they are good at that stretch play, and I think that plays more effective when you've got a dominant run blocker on the outside at the tight end position. So maybe that's something they need to look to. I think they're going to be more run heavy this season. They gave Devonta Freeman that money. They've got a good backup there, and we saw signs of that today. When they can get the run game going, it's very difficult because you kind of, I think as a defender, you get used to one guy's style somewhat. If they hit you with him for a couple of drives, and Coleman and Freeman are both very different types of runners. Freeman will try and finish runs. Coleman is always looking to make guys beat. He makes good decisions. He doesn't just try and beat guys for the sake of it. He will get down and protect himself, but I think it makes them very hard to defend. Both contributed in the passing game. Really, not a huge amount to say. This Falcons game plan clearly was to get this team tired, have longer drives. I think that may be something they look at from last year, where you saw their defence giving up some big numbers towards the end of games, because this offence was so explosive. The defence did have to defend a far larger number of plays. So I think we're going to see them look to become more of a ball control unit based on this outing. Those explosive plays are still going to be there. I still don't think Matt Ryan's quite hit his full form, but this was a much better performance. Looked a lot more confident in the pocket, made solid decisions, and really it was just a good, solid, all-round performance. My one concern being the pass protection for the long term. I'm not sure it looked like it was at a high enough level, but expect to see run-heavy early game plans. I think this team's going to be looking to become more of a play-action team than they were last year. Not seeing so many of the rollouts over the course of these first 2 weeks. Maybe we'll see that added back in. From the defensive side of things for the Packers, this was a real step backwards this week. Losing Mike Daniels was huge. It really did change what this team could do. You have to be able to get pressure on Matt Ryan. They were able to do so, but he was able to evade much of it. He could step up into his throws. The run game, that's where they missed him the most. I think the Falcons wouldn't have had quite as much consistent success with Mike Daniels there. It just freed guys up to get to the second level. You kind of have to double team Mike Daniels to guarantee he's not going to affect a play in the run game, and without him there, that wasn't a factor. Nick Perry and Clay Matthews, not the best run players at this point. It was all a bit simple for Devonta Freeman. He was getting into the second line of defenders far too easily over the course of this game. That, as a result, forced the Packers to try and dedicate more to the run than I think they would have liked. You saw a lot of one-on-one coverage on the outside, and Matt Ryan was just able to pick these guys apart. I think what you were going to see from the Packers was them playing that too deep sort of shell type defense to try and limit the explosive plays, and just hope that their front seven had enough to contain the running backs. But once Daniels went down, I think that plan became a little futile, and it just played into the Falcons' hands. So yeah, these corners, they're going to have easier days than this. This is one of the toughest, I think, groups of weapons to defend in the league at this point. They're going to have to continue to improve, because there's some really good wide receivers in the NFC that they're going to have to deal with come playoff time. Still convinced the Packers will get there unless some of these injuries prove to be massively significant. But defensively, yeah, this was a real step back. I still worry about this secondary, and this run defense has got to be better. They just don't have enough size at the linebacker position that if the defensive line's not doing its job to really shut down a good power back. And a few areas for concern, but we'll see how things go with the Packers from here on in. But I just think their game plan got ruined by that injury, and enabled the Packers. Well, the Packers never really looked like they had a cohesive plan from that point. The Falcons marching up and down the field with ease for much of that first half. On the other side of the ball, Aaron Rodgers was always going to have a tough task in this one when Bulaga was going to be out. That was pretty much known well beforehand. David Bakhtiari as well. That's not good. 2 new tackles. I don't think they did a horrific job, all things considered, when you're starting a pair of backups against some solid pass rushers. Brooks Reed's a solid player. Vic Beasley, of course, sack leader last year. He is going to be out for about a month. That could impact the Falcons' defence somewhat. I do worry about them a little up front. Without him, there's not a lot of depth in terms of pass rushers. He's kind of their ace in that regard. It means we'll see a lot more of their first round pick, Takk McKinley, you'd have to think. So it's going to be a big step up for him. But Beasley was looking pretty sharp to start the season. It's going to be a loss for them. Other than that, though, they were able to get some reasonable pressure from the edge. I don't think they're hugely tested. I thought Aaron Rodgers held on to the ball far too long. I think he had a pretty poor performance. Some of that can definitely be attributed to the struggles the offensive line had as a result of these injuries. Jordy Nelson also going down. No doubt that affected their game plan significantly. Desmond Trufant was probably going to have him for the vast majority of the day. It enabled Trufant to be freed up. And whilst I like Cobb and Devontae Adams, neither of them offer the level of threat that Jordy Nelson does. And you really need the 3 of them on the field at the same time to maximise this passing game. That's when this team becomes really scary to try and defend. And once he went out, Randall Cobb, Adams, they're good underneath, but they don't seem to like stretching the field with those two. It feels like Aaron Rodgers only really trusts Jordy Nelson on those deep passes. And Bennett, I thought he struggled today. Had a lot. They tried to use him to replace Jordy Nelson. I think that's kind of, as I said, with Cobb and Adams, they've not quite got the size or the physicality to play on the outside and do a lot of the things Jordy Nelson does. And Bennett wasn't able to replicate that. As a result, this passing game sort of stuttered. Rodgers was holding on to the ball, I think, far too long. I think that may have been a bit of an issue with the game plan. They should have, I think, tried to maybe throw a couple of screens, some quick passing plays into the mix early to try and get that pass rush sedated a little bit. It didn't really ever happen as a result. A lot of Aaron Rodgers running, taking some unnecessary hits, and the Falcons, they've got a lot of speed. They did a great job defending those broken plays, of which there were several. Rodgers did a good job. His mobility he's able to get outside the pocket, was able to do that successfully. Did take a few sacks in this game. The biggest play in the game being the backward pass, that was a result of a lot of pressure on him immediately off the blind side. Trufant taking that one in. Really, before that, Rodgers had struggled, and once we got into garbage time, he started to pick it up. But yeah, a bit of a worrying performance. Ty Montgomery, I really like the look of him as a running back. I think he offers such a unique kind of threat with the receiver background, but they need somebody else to step up from the rookies that they drafted and contribute, because I don't think he's going to be able to carry the load all year. He got dinged up last year, been dinged up early this year. They need someone else to step up. They could really do with a real power back to, much like Eddie Lacy was for the 2 years, to help this team out, because at the minute they just feel like they're too much of a finesse team and they can be overpowered. The interior is not what it was, and as a result, the blocking's not been great, and that's why Montgomery's really impressed me with his toughness up the middle, because he's not getting a great push and he's managing to see the holes and hit them when they're there, and they're not there for long. So it looked to me like the Packers' game plan was to try and capitalise on what they thought was going to be an aggressive Falcons defence, and it was. They certainly weren't going to sit there and play soft coverages and let Aaron Rodgers pick them apart. It looked like they were going to blitz, get that run, trust that would be enough to stop the run game, and that Rodgers would escape the pocket and the speed of their defence would be able to deal with it. And frankly, that's how it worked. Well, it ended up working out, and it was pretty much perfect for the Falcons. As the Packers' success came late in the game, when this game was already well in hand. Just the Packers look out of sync once again. How much of this can be attributed to injuries? Jordy Nelson's huge. We've seen them struggle without him in the past, and of course missing both tackles, and they're both very good players as well. Bakhtiari, one of the top left tackles in the league. Blag's a very good player. It's natural for them to struggle. I don't think the Packers need to be too concerned on that basis. This performance wasn't great, but there are a lot of arguments that can be made that they were missing so many guys. It hurt them, but they need these guys back on the field. Otherwise, they are going to continue to drop games against some of the better teams that they have to deal with, particularly with the Lions getting off to a good start. Defensively, from the Falcons' perspective, pass rush looked good. I'm not going to look too much into it based on the calibre of the offensive line, and I do think Rodgers was a bit shell-shocked today. I thought he held on to the ball too long. He made it life a little bit easy on them, and I don't like what the Packers are doing in terms of just trying to rely on Rodgers far too much in this game. I think it played into the Falcons' hands, so they get a lot of credit for the game plan. The run game, I didn't expect them to be truly tested by this Packers team, and frankly they weren't. The game got out of hand pretty early in this one because of the Falcons' offense just controlled this throughout, so that enabled them to just pin their ears back. Secondary played well. They were able to be pretty conservative toward the end of this, for large chunks of this game, and it felt like Rodgers was constantly looking for the deep ball, the big play to get them back into this, and just wasn't able to. The interception that he threw to Trufant was a terrible decision at that stage in the game. I understand you've got to have a big play, but it looked to me like the receiver gave up on the route, or there was a miscommunication. There definitely was something wrong there, because Trufant was the only guy anywhere near that ball, and it just didn't look like there was an opportunity to squeeze that one in. They were backed up at that point. They managed to get the big play off of the blind side. They'll miss Vic Beasley. I think it will be interesting to see how their pass rush looks without him. But secondary looked good. That's probably the most promising thing you can take away from this for the Falcons' defence. But they will be testing more. Unfortunately, my final conclusion on this one has to be, it's hard to read too much into this game from the Packers' perspective because of the circumstances with the many injuries. I've said that word far too often in this episode, but it really did feel like the story of the game. You lose arguably two of your three best players and your two top offensive linemen. Things are going to be tough, especially against the top team. Playing a home opener in prime time, it was never going to be easy. And there's been some worrying signs, but the Packers will likely figure it out if they can get those guys back. The Falcons, they got to take away from this. The offense looked far more in sync, looked a lot more like what we saw last season. So that's a real plus for them. This defense looks like it's going to be a better unit. People forget how young this group is. As the primary reason for optimism, I think, if you're a Falcons fan. This defense should only get better. Young talent like Keanu Neal and Deion Jones looking like they're going to be good players. Dontari Poe seems to have shored up that front a little bit from last year. This was a real positive outing for them. The only real downside being the Vic Beasley loss. I really am looking forward to seeing the Falcons have a legitimate test early in this season. Not sure who these guys have next week, so just check that out now, because that's going to be interesting. But Matt Ryan looked a lot more like Matt Ryan, and if this run game can play like it did today, then I think the Falcons are going to continue their regular season in the vein of what we saw last year. Very difficult to slow down. It's an incredibly talented group, let's face it. So there we go. Next week, big game against the Lions. Actually, that should be a good one. The Lions have started this season well. I would expect the Falcons to win that game and win it somewhat comfortably, particularly when you look at this Lions defence. It'll be a real test for them. In regards to the Packers, we are looking at... Man, it shows how little I've been looking at the upcoming slate of games. Just don't have time for it until Wednesday. They've got the Bengals, so they should be able to get on track against a Bengals team that has looked atrocious so far. So, Packers, be concerned if these injuries are long term, but if they're not, you've got the Bengals and the Bears to get back on track with, and then the Cowboys after that. So that will be a nice test to see where they are. I'll expect them to be 3-1 heading into that game. Similarly for the Falcons, I think the Lions game will be a nice test. I'd still expect them to win, but seeing where they are early in this season, then the Bills, and then the Dolphins could be a test. So that should be a good matchup in a couple of weeks. So things are looking good for the Falcons after this one. They're going to be a contender in the NFC. I'm pretty confident in that. The Packers, as long as his injuries aren't, they will also. So there you have it. That's my assessment of this one. Really like what the Falcons did. I think their game plans were spot on both sides of the ball. The Packers, I think they were forced to change on the fly, struggled, and just ended up undermanned and outgunned in this one. So there you have it. Let us know what you think. Do you enjoy this game? It wasn't the most fun unless you're a Falcons fan, I don't think. Give us a shout. Let us know if you saw anything interesting in this one. We've got the comment section below, the Cover Zero Facebook page. You can find me on Twitter at Simon Conboy. Always happy to talk football. And if you've enjoyed this, check out some more episodes. There'll be some previews going up. Going to review the Monday night game shortly. That was also not a great game. A lot of bad offensive lines at the minute in the NFL. It's affecting my enjoyment of a lot of these games. But that'll be up. Definitely check out the round table. There'll be me and a couple of mates. We'll be talking about every game that happened on Sunday and all the upcoming games. So definitely worth it. And if you could like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon. It'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always. Have a great evening and go Bucks.